Welcome to a panel discussion titled The Global Exchange, the Future of Education. You'll be hearing from a world-famous sociologist, national policymakers, the General Secretary of the world's leading medical education organization, the president of a top US engineering education organization, and experts on digital technology and EdTech. So during the next hour and a half, I will be your moderator. I'm Gavin Hewitt, the BBC's former chief correspondent and Europe editor. So to the first panelist, it is Professor William Spady, the founder of the International Network for Outcomes-Based Education, a professor who has been leader in this field for 50 years. Professor, my first question to you is, to what extent does the education establishment support outcome-based education?
Thank you, Gavin. I firmly believe that when, quote, the education establishment hears about outcome-based education and its effectiveness, they support it. The problem is that the system itself, okay, that's been modeled after both European and American models, basically worldwide, is an entrenched system. It's time-based, it's run by the calendar and the clock and schedules, which immediately constrains and limits the curriculum, how much time there is for instruction, when we do assessments, the accreditation system, the credentialing system. So everything is time-bound in a sort of industrial age way, and we are profoundly past that. So my invitation for any government officials and any people who are the head of institutions out there is to realize that we're in a time trap. And this is an opportunity that we have to get out of it and begin to create flexibilities that technologies allow us to do, and our own personal resources allow us to do, to be more human-centered. I'll just call it that, both for faculty and for learners.
Thank you very much. Let's move on straight away to our second panelist, who's Professor Ronald Harden, the General Secretary of the Association for Medical Education in Europe. Professor, my question to you is this: if outcomes-based education is implemented, what does it mean for students? We did have Professor Harden with
Yep, here.
Right, very good.
Right, sorry, back again, right. Right. Yep, I heard your question, thank you. It's an important question because I think one of the great reasons why outcome-based education is so important is the effect on students. I think one of the huge changes we're seeing in education is a changing role of students from simply being a client or a consumer to students being a partner in the learning process. And this partnership in the learning process is greatly facilitated by the move to outcome-based education. Students can help direct their own learning if they know what they should be learning. So self-directed learning becomes a possibility. They can evaluate their own learning if they know what they should be assessing. And they can help construct the curriculum and be co-curriculum developers if they know what the curriculum aims are. So I think this is a key question. The big effect on students will be give them power and allow them to be partners in the learning process.
Professor, thank you very much. Let's see if we can move smoothly to our third panelist. And our third panelist is Professor Anil Sarasrabuha. My apologies if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. He's chairman of the All India Council for Technical Education. Let's see if we can come to you quite easily. Maybe not there immediately. Let me just go with the question and hope that we will then have the professor. Professor, what do you suggest to young people who are thinking of attaining outcome-based education via working online? Now, do we have Professor Anil Sarasrabuha? I think.
Yes. Thank you, Gavin Hewitt.
Sorry, my apologies for not meeting with you sooner, but did you hear the question?
Yeah, I've heard the question.
Okay, very good. Well, it's up to you to speak.
Yeah, we were discussing about outcome-based education and our youth who have gone through a great transformation during the last 2 years of pandemic. They have all realized that outcome-based education also can be imparted through online education, digital education. Earlier, we were all believing that it is only in the classrooms or the face-to-face mode of education that we can impart holistic, multidisciplinary, outcome-based education with a proper vision and mission. But now the pandemic is past us and we have learned lessons, and making use of that, we have been in a position to strongly advocate that outcome-based education is also possible. For example, in India, during the last 2 years, we had huge internship opportunities provided to students who could not physically go to the industry, but still, in an online mode, they had mentors from industry who could support them, help them to understand the problems of the industry and try to solve them by innovative ways. And that's why the essence of entire education system of making holistic human beings who are value-based, where examinations are meant for evaluating what we measure can be improved, all of that is possible through the online mechanism, or what we call today as blended learning. Thank you very much for that brilliant question.
Thank you, and we will, technology permitting, we will return to you a little bit later. Our next panelist is Dr. J. Prospero Popoe de Vera. Let's see if we can make sure we're connecting, that we're talking.
He's not available. He's not available today.
Okay, he's not available, so we'll go on to the next person, which is Professor Mesbaruddin, Chairman of the Bangladesh Accreditation Council. Do we have you? Oh yeah, I think we do. Okay. My question really is, what is the current state of higher education in Bangladesh at the moment?
Just to speak. Yeah,
please.
Bangladesh, actually, we inherited from 1947 a British traditional system of education for our country. It was actually at that time a part of Pakistan. It was East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh later on. No real move was taken, effective move was taken to change that system, but only from the last decade, we have started changing the whole traditional system to go for a more effective education system. And we have been thinking of outcome-based education. It has been it has been accepted by the authorities, and the experts have dealt with it. And what is called we have framed we have developed called National Bangladesh National Qualification Framework. And in that, we have actually laid out the outcome of the education that we should be achieving, we should be aiming to achieve at. And then it became prominently that outcome-based education is by far the best, possibly the best way we have now to go for. And we are moving towards having outcome-based curriculum developed in our higher education systems. And in that respect, we have been trying to go to the universities and the higher education institutions like colleges to formulate their curriculum based on outcome-based ideas. So we are doing that, and the Bangladesh Accreditation Council has been established in 2018, and they are taking care of the quality education quality, and then the quality education leading to accreditation. The accreditation process will be effective if the whole education system, the the universities will have for their curriculum and the problem based mostly on outcome-based education, their infrastructure, the other quality standards, etc. So we are moving towards achieving the outcome-based education for our system in future. We're actually in the process of change. A lot of initiatives have been taken by the government, and in few years from now, I think there will be a big change coming to the educational scenario of Bangladesh, which is going to be, I think, better and more quality education will be provided to the students here. We have got a very large number of students, mind it. It's about 4.9 million students who come for tertiary level education. It's a huge task to take all of them on board to go forward with outcome-based education. We are in the process of moving towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We can pick up on more of that later. Now, our next panelist is Professor Jenna Carpenter, an expert in engineering education and diversity and inclusion. The first thing I'm learning to do here is to look up on the screen to make sure we've got the next person who I'm talking to. Is Dr. Jenna Carpenter there?
Yeah. Yes, I'm here. Thanks.
Very good. My question is, how do institutions need to change the way students are recruited in order to make audiences and the people who attend your courses more diverse?
So that's a great question. Certainly, it's not that programs around the world haven't been working on this, but we really have made very, very little progress in the last, say, 30, 40, 50 years. An issue that really aggravates this is that many developed countries are having a declining birth rate. So that means you have more people leaving the STEM workforce than you have coming in. And so, we no longer can afford to exclude people because of, the way they look or their race or their background from engineering. If you look at most of our curricula and processes for admitting students, it really is designed to filter out students who haven't had opportunity, right? So students who arrive with lots of background, lots of preparation, lots of opportunity, we let in the door. And yet students can fail to have opportunity for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with themselves, right? I mean, they can't force opportunities to come their way. And so we really do need to change what we do. That means that we need to admit a much more broad spectrum of student in terms of pre-college opportunity and background. We need multiple pathways to get into STEM degrees so that we can accommodate students who show up with the different types of preparation. We need lots of strong student support services so we can help students be successful. We need to teach things like professional skills, time management, organizational skills, study skills, taking ownership for your learning, resilience, self-management, things like motivation, self-discipline. How do you form a study group? We need to normalize help seeking, need to focus on collaboration and stop emphasizing competition. All of these things are going to help all students succeed, but it also helps a much broader spectrum of students succeed. And of course, a few other things research shows helps admitting students directly into STEM fields, not having to go take a bunch of gen ed courses or math and science courses before we ever bring them into our coursework. So at my university, we have them take engineering courses day one. And so that way they begin to learn the discipline. They begin to develop a sense of identity, a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And those things we know help students stick with it because STEM majors are more challenging and difficult. Allowing students to work on projects. So we have students work in teams on projects on day one. We work in class labs. So lecture and lab are in the same room at the same time. And then using things like asset-based approaches, which look at the skills students bring instead of deficit-based approaches, which look at the things that they're missing. So all of these things really help. Also looking at messaging, who can do STEM, what is STEM, helping students understand the wide variety of problems you can solve with a STEM degree, the huge opportunity you have to make a difference in the world. All these sorts of things help us diversify STEM.
Thank you very much for that. And now let's move on to Professor McFong. I hope you're there, Professor. Professor McFong is CEO of the International Network for Outcome-Based Education and a software company, Mac Team. We need some good software to work for us now to find you. Are you there, Professor?
Yes, I'm here.
Very good. Thank you for being there. My question to you is this: is the existing educational technology used in the lecture room, the classroom, sufficient for implementing outcome-based education?
Okay, it's a great question. Now, the future education will be technology-driven for teaching, delivery, and learning, that's for sure. Now, technology will evolve, and we will need to adapt and identify the right technology even for the present. Now, to address this question, I must first clarify that the OBE is a principle and a framework that enable instruction improvement by focusing on student learning outcomes. So OBE has a well-defined concept of design down process or the backward design that instructor can follow for its implementations. So the OBE implement itself does not require any specific digital technology. In fact, can use any appropriate digital technology creatively for its implementations. But just as evident in many of the presentation sessions in this virtual summit, many ideas are presented to show how OBE can be used in classroom, curriculum design, policy changes, to enhance or improve the OBE adoptions. There's no specific standard digital technology in any of these presented ideas. However, once OBE is adopted, the next logical question we will normally ask is, how do we know we're doing it right? So is the student learning reaching the target outcomes? Do we have an assessment or even a process for improvement? So, however, all these questions that we have in mind are precisely the same questions we normally address for program accreditations. Now, program accreditation is already the must-have activity a program must satisfy. So could we find synergy between the program accreditations and the adoption of OBE in teaching? So let's first take a look at the two processes for accreditations. One is assessment, one is evaluations. Now, assessment by design offers a framework through which you can identify, collect, and prepare data to evaluate the attainment of student outcome and program educational objective. Now, process begins with PO, associate the corresponding student outcome, then define the relevant performance indicator, then align the course outcome for teaching delivery. Now, however, if you recall the design down concept of OB implementations, they're using different terminology, but the process is the same. You look at the end goal and finally figure out what are the design activity needed for the class activity to support the outcome. So, however, there's one more process in the equation of accreditation. That's the evaluation process. Now, evaluation, on the other hand, is a process for interpreting the data and the evidence collected through the assessment process to drive action item for improvement. So therefore, we need the right technology to maintain consistency for the adoption of OBE among instructor and also the ability to deal with the large amount of data just so that we can gauge the student learning and meeting outcomes. So let's look at what we currently have. So what we currently have is so-called the LMS system, which is the dominating technology that facilitates instruction in the physical classroom or virtual environment by easing the teaching delivery, like assignment submission, classroom interactions, and grading. But what really missing is the ability to gauge the teaching effectiveness and the student learning. That's what really missing. So maybe it's time to say goodbye to our existing LMS and welcome a new system called OAS, which is Outcome Assessment System. Now, Outcome Assessment System, such as eval tools, okay, they are the key element for a comprehensive OS process to include the following, for example, student advising for effective involvement so they can know exactly where they are in the learning process. Or even meeting minute for tracking and reporting what are the track record and activity been done. And cost portfolio for evidence, or even the review portal for monitoring the progressions in improvement. And committee portal for closing the loop for action items. So all this continuous improvement system is one of the key elements that's missing in the current system. So in sum, we do need to have the right technology for successful OB implementations. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I hope that we'll come back to you and perhaps some of the questions will touch upon this issue of technology. The next in line is Dr. Wajid Hussain, who's the Chief Operating Officer for the International Network for Outcome-Based Education and involved in developing national qualification networks. Dr. Wajid, my question is to you. In your view, are the systems in place, are they sufficient for learner empowerment in education? So essentially what I'm saying is the system there to achieve what your goals are, or is that something that needs to change?
What we're talking about, Gavin, is national qualification frameworks and national quality systems. So national qualification frameworks actually have been mandated last few years. If you look at UNESCO documents, 2019 documents, you're looking at 100 plus countries, a lot of developing countries. They have all mandated outcome-based systems, and they're using national qualification frameworks to basically also enforce this or regulate that across all sectors of education at all levels and through the accreditation agencies and national testing. However, when you study these systems and the frameworks deeply, you find out that the language that they use is not actually language of outcomes. You do not find a specific sectoral focus of this national qualification frameworks. You rather find all learning pathways, and you find a series of levels, and you don't find the connect between the levels. In fact, some of the levels, they prescribe a very high form of learning or achievement, which is sometimes even not possible. They don't provide institutions actual practical ways to reach to that point. And I've seen CEDEFOP documents wherein they show like level 8, that's doctorate or postdoctorate levels. At that level, metacognition starts. But we know that metacognition can start even at the kindergarten. And actually, we have documents that are showing this. We have countries that use learning domains which are kind of like overlapping other learning domains. For example, they select teamwork and they select leadership. They just look at the buzzwords in the market and they select. They don't talk to experts, assessment experts. They should do that. When you select teamwork and leadership, you actually create a lot of redundancy for institutions, for education, because teamwork cannot happen without leadership. Leadership is a subset of teamwork. So when you select learning domains, you should not use subsets of one another. You should not do that. There should be minimal overlap. This is a key rule. So many of these things are missing. Another country which I saw, they selected lifelong learning as one of their domains for national qualification framework. And they also selected problem solving. But if you look at experts like Michael Magera in 2015, they said that lifelong learning is basically student social interaction, student thinking, and also problem solving. So again, you create the redundancy. The learning progression is not indicated. These are big, gigantic problems. Like the difference between skills, competencies, and outcomes are not explained. Westerner 2001 paper very clearly indicates this, that you don't need additional mental cognition for competency. That was Westerner model. And I have what we call the Hussain model. I've talked about it in there. So they are all redundantly created in national qualification. Like they mentioned competency as psychomotor skills. And they try to distinguish those two, and they created a lot of problems. So that's why we have the skills gap, and we have to fix those. So taking a lot of time.
Good, thank you very much. Let's go to our next panelist, which is Professor Elias Samper, professor at Arulana University. Professor, are you there?
I am here, Gavin. Nice to
meet you. Good, nice to meet you. My question to you is, in designing a curriculum, what are the key elements?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the question. Basically, I'll put them to three important questions that you need to have. The first one is consideration for the future. What kind of impacts we want to have in the world? If you are trying to think about developing a pilot, what kind of a pilot do we need in the world? So that is future focus. It's shaping our desired future, collective future. And from there, we need to now ask ourselves, what kind of abilities, capabilities, and competencies that a person needs to become that type of professional, that type of human being that we are looking at. That's where we craft the outcomes. But then in order to make the outcomes realizable, we have to introduce the learning experience, which is supposed to be a rich and diverse learning experience where you immerse the learner into that process so that the outcomes can be realized. So essentially using the language of design that speaks to the inputs, processes, and outputs. These are the stuff we do in school, in classrooms, that students are supposed to leave behind as they move on with their realized outcomes. So once we have these three things together, I think we are more likely to have a very strong and very deliberate, very specific, very empowering type of educational experience for everybody. And really, that's how we can do it. Thank you very much.
Gavin, you're just on mute.
You are mute again, Gavin.
Right, I think that's better now. It's just a question for all of us, actually, when we're not speaking, to mute it and to unmute it when it's our turn to say something. And that just might improve the sound quality. Very good. Let's move on now to our next speaker, who is Des Collier, responsible for leading change and course design. I've got a question for you, Des Collier, which is, who essentially should control education? Is it school boards and parents, or who should set the agenda?
Thank you, Gavin.
I'm just going to
Thank you. I think off the top of your mind, you would say it's the government's job to control education. Interestingly, just an anecdote from South Africa recently, an academic director of education proposed that all children of a particular sector in the South African population should be removed from their parents and put into a state institution to be indoctrinated so that they conformed to what the government requires. Needless to say, that caused a huge outrage. It certainly got the attention of the parents finally, who stood up and said, our children do not belong to the state. The last ones that you want, I'm giving my opinion, the last ones that you want to entrust the implementation of transformational outcome-based education to are politicians, very closely followed by traditional curriculum designers. My answer to the question is to ask a question. Who are the customers of education? Who is it that goes for the system and is supposed to benefit from it or not? To me, the answer is the children. The learners are the customers. And people would say, but how much does a 5-year-old know about what he needs? Well, he has parents, doesn't he? So for me, coming from this paradigm that I'm in, I'm saying the children and the parents should drive the education, or they should at least have a voice or be heard in what is required. And I believe that this is possible in transformational outcome-based education. And I'm coming from a individual gifted paradigm there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we've had 9 panelists so far, so we're getting through the first comments. We've got 3 more panelists, as far as I can see. Firstly, and apologies if I get the pronunciation wrong. Firstly, Dr. Lavella Divina Grazia, who is the Assistant University Professor in the Philippines. And my question is this: how do you judge outcome-based education and whether it transforms communities? I hope, Professor, you heard that.
Thank you, Gavin, for that very nice question. Yeah, for me, it's a simple way to answer that. We just always go back to what is really outcome-based education and how it can transform not only our education, but to transform the community. OBE at its earliest paradigm has emphasized the outcomes of greater significance that can be referred to as the hierarchy of learning life role performances, in contrast to another educational paradigm which focuses on mastery learning and cognitive assessment and grading rather than demonstrable authentic performances. Transformational OBE has elevated the definition of outcomes of significance into the development of total learners or leaders when assuming certain life tasks through human empowerment, as articulated by Dr. William Spade himself, which I personally believe as well. Dr. Spade's human empowerment put every human being at the heart of education. And I think this is the most important thing to understand for all of us who are doing OBE. This is practically education's fundamental role and purpose. That is to understand what's really OBE. That is why human empowerment upholds 4 power principles that, by default, educators, teachers, professors, trainers, even parents in the community who hold such crucial functions should set a high expectation for all learners. And what kind of learning should learner learn to succeed? Expand, extend opportunities for learners to attain that success, not make or break. So while not make or break is an influence of a systemic entrenchment of what we've been used to do, what we've been doing. However, recently, Dr. Spady has further transcended human empowerment into a higher level of understanding of diversity, uniqueness, deep complexity, and infinite human potentiality in physical, mental, psychological, spiritual, and so many other more. Education in its processes, therefore, must be reflective of how human being be empowered to its fullest capacity in order to attain a nation or community's collective hope and aspirations that make humanity thrive, not just survive with their universal environment. In fact, when I was listening to all my colleagues here, I heard important themes like program issues and concerns on programs, especially on the STEAM education, technology-based implementation of outcome-based education, strategies of developing learning, designs and processes, assessments. How are we going to assess our learners? In what way, or is it how crucial assessment could stand or could function to ensure that functional behavior or something that we really decide for is working? The qualification framework, how will it place or position itself in the whole education system in outcome-based education? Curriculum designing, what is its role? Course designing, and who is in control? So I think I have some answers later as to who will really control and who will make decision in terms of what kind of learners are we going to develop. So at the heart of everything, when we view outcome-based education into a transformational outcome-based education, we can always go back to the idea or to the consciousness that learners' qualities are actually the very essence of why education has to exist.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I just want to use this opportunity to pass a message. I so far haven't received any questions from the audience from outside. Now, whether that's something technically I'm not doing or whether that's something that will come later, I'm just flagging that up at this moment. Let's move on to, I think, our final 2 panelists for this early session. Now it's Dr. Karen Singh, who's Head of School and Academic Director for the Cambridge Assessment International Education. So, Dr. Singh, my question to you is really, it's about India. How do you see the future for education tech in India?
Right. Thanks a lot for the question, Gavin. So I'm going to start my answer by taking a leaf from the response that came from Mr. Des Collier. I loved his response, and I'll tell you why. It had a very genuine humanistic perspective to it. See, when we talk about technology or the future of education in developing countries like India, we ended up developing, or we are developing AI for a long time, but it might sound philosophically poetic. We did not look at the human eye. What I mean by that is we're all talking about who's the primary stakeholder, who should be the decision maker when it comes to transformational education. So the human consciousness was not really taken into consideration when we developed technology. And especially in developing countries, a lot of us are talking about that, yes, the pandemic has taught us a lot of important things. And I did repeat this point before, but technology has always been there. Technology has always been used in education for the last probably 11 to 12 years. It got amplified, it got quantified, it got a better name, for the better word for it, in the last 4 years. But the simple factor is, in developing countries, when we talk about EdTechs, and this is a ripple effect which is happening all across the world, why we are now facing a problem when it comes to, let's say, who's the policymaker? And my simple answer is, did you ask the child the question before, what kind of learning would you like on the application before you build it? Or did you just think about the school owner? You have to understand it's very important, and it actually is a gift from British Empire to India, that private education has been the number one way of model of education in India, and also in neighboring countries like Pakistan, the UAE, or Southeast Asia, because public education system does not work simply because of corruption. There are no other reasons. So when we talk about a lot of change makers, when we talk about India now, when we talk about the fact that it's been mushrooming edtech companies, churning them like a fish market in the last 4 years, what we need to understand is that countries like India have to also realize what is the future of education technology when it comes to student-centric outcome. I mean, you are creating children who are supposed to be your leaders. So what kind of leadership skills are you actually teaching them through technology? That's point number one. Point number two, you're leaving them with a planet which you've pretty much bamboozled in the last 30 odd years. So a guy who represents the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, I have to harp this tune again. Once we are all gone and these children are given with all these fancy tools and gimmicks to play around with, do they even have a planet to use them on? So my question is, when you talk about skills, when you talk about stakeholders, when you talk about the building of transformational technology and transformational education, you also have to look at the future of tangible survival. Where is compassion? I mean, somebody was talking about competition. Yes, competition is absolutely important, but the rate at which we're going, we probably might start coding the kids when they're when they're probably in the mother's womb, because I think in India, we have already started coding at the age of 3. So it's not long time left before we start probably coding it. It's just a hypothetical situation. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to understand that the child is at the center of all this. But unfortunately, we've all put ourselves at the center of all this, deciding for the person who's supposed to actually be at the receiving end of education. So I think we have to kind of sort of relearn, unlearn at this point, kind of sit back, kind of understand that, okay, we have a lot of things at our disposal, at our arsenal. And I would only say one thing: collaborate, whether you're in a country like India, or you're sitting in the United Kingdom, or you're sitting in Indonesia. The only way we can take this planet forward with respect to our children being our future leaders is we're working together. Thanks, Kevin, for that question.
Thank you very much. And we no doubt will be coming back to you. I think we've got one more panelist, and then I will go hunting for some reaction from the audience, and hopefully we can get a debate going. The final panelist is Professor Vikas Rai Bhatnagar, who specializes in general management and organization in India. And my question is really, what organizational factors impede outcomes-based education? What are those factors that really get in the way from your perspective? Professor Bhatnagar, you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I have an experience of Indian Army, long experience in the corporate and then in the academics. So from that experience, I would share that what I think gets into the way of organizations that impede outcome-based education. The first point is the ritualistic vision, mission, and value statements which are not operationalized. In the corporates, the business firms, we are very passionate about these vision, mission, values, and these are lived, these are operationalized. Now, Chris Argyris talks about espoused theories and theories in use. So there's something which we tell to the world, which feels good, and there's something which we practice. So if we have a very tight coupling of the vision, mission, values, and have a strategy emerging from that, which is outcome-based, then it would do a lot of good for the outcome-based education. The second I would like to mention is about the accreditation and the ranking system. Now, these are very beautiful frameworks for enabling the business schools and the educational institutes to improve their efficiencies and do what they are supposed to be doing. But the experience has been that there's a lot of stage management which happens, and these accreditation frameworks are not taken in the right spirit, right? The third point that I would like to mention is that students learn a lot by what they experience. The Kolb's learning, the experiential learning framework. Now, management institutes need to also have very good management practices. What we teach and what they experience in the management schools, there has to be an alignment, and students would learn much more by what they experience as management practices as compared to what is being taught. So these are the 3 points I would like to mention at this point of time. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. At the moment, I don't have questions from the audience, but I do have some of my own questions, which I will put to you. And if there's any way you've got something you're burning to say, by all means, raise your hand and I will try and get to you. It may not be a perfect system, but I will try. Just going back to where we started with Professor William Spady, I've got a question occurred to me whilst you were talking. How do you really assess whether the program is working? Is it because of exam results? Is it because of essays, practical matters which are done? I'm interested in your view as to how you assess whether your own system, if you like, is working. Is William Spady there?
Yeah, here I am. Thank you, Gavin. I'm going to say that outcome-based education is a system that only goes so far. Okay, this may be good news or bad news for all of us to hear. There was a gigantic shift that happened unexpectedly in 1991. And I want to use that shift to reinforce what Professor Harkin said very early, what Lovella has been saying, and others of you have been saying. That shift was a shift from outcomes being curriculum and skills and things that we measure and indicators and all of that technical stuff in learning to human beings themselves. And it happened quite by accident. Maybe it was a gift from God, who knows? But all of a sudden, I was working with this school district, and we were creating a frame for outcomes that were about human beings. They were not about skills. They were not about learning. They were not about essays. They were not about test scores. They were about human beings. And the key one, the number one, the driving one, was called self-directed learners. All right. Well, that is what empowerment is. Empowerment is the capacity to be self-directed, okay, self-assessing, self-evolving, self-growing, etc. That doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen overnight. It's not a course. It's not in a textbook. It's not a program, and it's not on tests. So OBE itself, in this evolution that I mentioned in my earlier comments, OBE has evolved from being, and I don't mean this to be in any way uncomplimentary, but a kind of a technocratic, mechanistic approach to learning, okay, to one where we're talking about deeply looking at who is the human being, and if we're going to be aligned, all right, then what kind of learning experiences and what kind of developmental experiences do we create over the lifetime of the student who's with us to develop those inner capacities? Several of you have touched on that, okay? And I mean, I applaud that, but I've always had some resistance ever since that fateful day way back in 1991 when this happened. Okay, I've always had some resistance to technology, because technology is not the human soul, it is not the human spirit. Now, how it can help foster that, to me, is a really, really critical question for all of us to grapple with. But the big shift happened from, and I'll put words on it and then I'm finished, from an empowerment model where the adults put into the kids all the things the adults want the kids to learn, to an empowerment model, which is to evoke out of the children the creativity, the spirit, the desire to learn, the desire to create, okay, the desire to affiliate and collaborate and cooperate, all of that. They want to do that. That is in the human essence. And that's what I believe the future of education needs to be. The fundamental shift that occurred in outcome-based education was from how can the students be successful on the curriculum and everything we're teaching them. The driving question was, what kind of human beings are we sending out the door who will change the world positively? Because the world needs a ton of help. And it's not going to come from just more technical kinds of learning and education. That the intensity of the human spirit needs to be there. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you. I have a question which is almost a follow-up, but perhaps somebody else would like to answer it. You mentioned it's not about test scores, principally. How difficult a message is that to sell to some parents, or is that message more difficult to sell in different parts of the world? Now, I don't know whether you want to answer that or whether there's somebody else. Can I, maybe Professor Harden, do you want to come in here? Oh,
it's a great question. How do we evaluate the benefits of outcome-based education? There was an interesting book just written last year on what do you mean by learning, and the argument of the author was learning is not simply measured by how students do better in the tests and various exams. And in medicine, for example, how we should define what we mean by learning is, are they going to become better doctors? So I think the challenge to us in medicine and healthcare professional education, the introduction of outcome-based education, are we having better doctors now who are giving better healthcare to their population and better healthcare out there in the delivery and better health in the population? So I think it's moving away, and I think we're already accepting this. It's moving away from simply our students doing better in the exams to what is the end product in terms of the care they're delivering, these doctors who go through an outcome-based program into the population they're serving.
Gavin, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but cognitive learning, all the stuff that goes in the exams, is one-dimensional learning. It's what the brain can process. Life, okay, is five-dimensional, and I've laid them out. It was in my presentation yesterday, my opening keynote. Okay, what outcome-based education has done for me, and I think has done for my colleagues, is help us realize that cognition is the ground floor of a mountain. It's the base level. It can't be eliminated. But there is so much more. Competence is what you can do with it. Social and environmental contexts is where it all plays out. Then being able to do it in a sustained way in performance roles is the real test of what kind of contribution you can make. And the fifth level is, so what's inside the human being that makes all of that truly contributive and constructive and helps humanity's evolution? Okay, it's five levels, and cognition and learning the factual stuff is just one dimension of that.
Thanks very much. Did I see somebody else with their hand up? I think I did. Yes, Dr. Singh, do you want to come in here? I think you've been following the debate and you've got something you want to say.
Thank you, Gavin, for this opportunity. I actually wanted to add value add rather to Professor William Spady and also to Professor Harden's point. See, when we talk about the revolution that actually happened in outcome-based learning, and this is not just happening in one country, this is every single part of the world. When you walk into an interview, you're no longer assessed on a piece of paper. Your personality or your presence is not your CV, it's you. So I might have, for that matter, a PhD or the simple question that I ask people when I interview them is, great, you've got a master's in engineering. I can just Google everything you know, but what can you do with that? That's my problem. So if you can't innovate, if you can't solve problems, if you're just going to regurgitate the information that's been taught to you for the last 20 odd years, you have no use in my organization. It's pretty simple. It's not just me talking here. See, when we talk about being with Cambridge, but at the same time being a person who's been practicing Waldorf curriculum for the last 15 years, what I've realized is that without developing the intellectual bandwidth and the consciousness of each and every child, without pressurizing them with the fact that if they get a certain amount of marks, they're good, and if they don't get it, they're bad. That is where the problem is. And it is not just a problem in India or Pakistan or South Africa or Asia, it is a problem in the world. As a society, we perceive success, especially materialistic success, based on quantitative data, which is based on marks. But unfortunately or fortunately, now in the world, we do not hire based on that data. So the point is, the human being comes back to the center stage, which is a relief because the world is crying out for the human beings to come back and work with the machines. Work with the machines. I always say that teachers are always empowered by technology. And Dr. Wajid had asked me this question, and I wanted to repeat it again. Teachers are always empowered with technology. And I think Professor William Spady has put it just 2 points. I just wanted to add my perspective and my experience on how we are seeing this trend all over the world. It's not just happening in one place. Thank you. Thank you, Gavin, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'll ask another question. I just wanted to pick up on this idea of the role of technology. does technology increase the human experience? We know it's a great enabler. I don't know, Professor Carpenter, whether you want to come in on the role of technology. I mean, isn't that driving a lot of what the students believe, what they learn, how they interact with others? Where do you stand on that?
Well, certainly at my own institution, Campbell University, we do a very hands-on project-based approach all 4 years. Again, all of the classes are taught in a class lab. Students have to learn the content, but then they have to apply it. Small projects, big projects, everything in between. They have to do presentations, posters. They talk with industry people. They're solving industry problems. So, using that sort of approach really gets to a lot of these things we're talking about. And certainly they have to learn to use technology. When you're working a project, trying to solve a problem, create a project to solve a problem, you got to learn things you don't know. And so technology is a great way to do that, right? You can get online, you can find resources, you can learn a lot of things you don't know. But students also have to figure out how to take the basic tools, technology tools that they've been given and make those work, make those solve the problem that they've got in front of them. So the technology is not the end. It's one of the suite of tools that they have to try to reach the goal that they've got, the outcome that they've got. And so, students may need to learn technology they haven't had before. We have students do internships. We're in the Research Triangle region of North Carolina, so huge industries here in engineering and STEM that our students work at in the summer. And so maybe we've taught them one CAD software, computer-aided design or modeling software, but maybe when they go to work at this company, they have to learn something else. But they can do that, right? They've had one, they kind of get how it works. And so the learning how to learn, right, is something you're always doing. And so technology provides you opportunities to do that again, but they're tools, right? They're not the end all be all.
Thank you very much for that. I noticed there was a hand up. So I'm pointing, there's two hands up and I'll make sure I come to both of you. So if you go ahead first. Professor,
Gavin. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Do you want to come back on what you've just been hearing? Maybe Okay. If you go ahead, Professor Sampra.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to pick up on 2 points on technology and I want to go back to assessment. Sorry for taking you back to that, because much of my work involves working with teachers and professors, and we have had a lot of debate on marks and scores. The Victorian curriculum in Australia has come up with a system where they only grade students on satisfactory and non-satisfactory. What that means is there are only two things actually. Are you succeeding on the outcomes or not? Then there's another layer that is added, to what extent? So meaning to say, going back to the words of Dr. William Spedy, you cannot assess what you have not defined. So if you just start from that point, you can actually define 3 parameters or 2 parameters where you can look at a learner and say they are growing or they are not growing, because human consciousness expands. But we know that there are manifestations that we can objectively agree upon to say this is an indicator that someone is really growing. Unfortunately, academics are not using that. We are so used to manipulate the numbers because it looks more objective. But as a matter of fact, it's a more subjective thing we do when we talk about marks. Defining a person's growth is, the example of conducting interviews is really a typical one that I found. When a person walk in, you can actually just say the person is ready for the job or not ready. The person is competent or incompetent. There is no 5.5 or 6.5. It's just a straightforward question. So I think that's a language we need to bring back in the assessment of students in our schools. On the point of technology, I think there's a sense that every time we mention technology in education, it's always associated with using things like a PowerPoint or so on and so. But technology covers everything. It can be student using a camera or using a video. They can video themselves to demonstrate some growth and some kind of illustrations of what they are doing. So technology is very broad. And so if we are talking about integrating technology, actually it's talking about the entire experience of a human being that can be physically manifested or maybe demonstrated through some other art forms that include technology. So we shouldn't be so much scared of it as if it's a disruptor in a sense. it's important to know that technology, we are using it. It's not education. It's actually the means and it's not the end. So we should not be thinking about becoming experts in technology unless we are specializing in technology. But we have to be thinking about opportunities that technology bring along and integrate them appropriately in our curriculum design. Thank you very much.
I didn't unmute, so please go ahead. I know you had your hand up.
Yeah. See, in fact, it was a wonderful discussion on this whole issue of humanity, humanism on one side, use of technology on the other side, and outcome-based education. Very brilliant. But the entire technology platforms are meant for using them as tools. They are not end in themselves. The most important part is they are empowering. Suppose a student in a remote tribal area of some India or Pakistan somewhere can get an access to the best quality education from US or Australia or Japan. I think that is what is empowering in terms of use of technology. Ultimately, as everyone pointed out, whether it is in the interview or the evaluation processes, the numbers are so large, huge. Technology only enables us. But ultimately, it is the human-to-human interaction, it is the teacher-to-student interaction, that experiential learning, which gives a holistic image of that particular individual who can transform the planet into a useful, whatever you want to do, it has to be towards the society. You know, that spiritualism also has to be built in, and that comes from maybe one-to-one interaction between the teacher and student, which today can also happen through the use of technology. Today we are all 13 people plus the person who is handling all of us, Gavin. We are on different places, still we are able to talk to each other and understand each other. So we should understand on one side use of technology, limitations of technology, and we must go ahead.
Gavin, you're just on mute. Just need to unmute yourself.
So let me go through that again. I think there's a question that's come in, which I don't know who's going to answer it, but there were some hands up. Why would technology be so critical for implementing OBE? Now, let's see who, I'm sorry, I don't remember everybody's name, but Dr. Labella, would you like to answer that one?
Thank you, Gavin. Talking about technology, I'm just thinking like, just like here in the Philippines, it's so hot and we need air conditions so that we can be comfortable. So I think we can also look at technology at that manner and at that perspective as well. But my concern really, because, we can still mold individual learners who can be very holistic, can be very compassionate, possessing a very great qualities of individuals, human-centered qualities. But the rest will just be, what we do and what are the tools that we use and to make things happen around us. But my concern really was going back to the assessment that was being raised to Dr. Spady. It's about, we've been so focused on innovating how to coming up with this, with certain performance, gauging certain performance, like marking or grading. How can we substitute that? But my concern is more on, if we are, for example, coming up with a qualitative descriptors of all these performances that we want to see that our students can demonstrate and can perform, then what do we do? What have we done rather to those others who were not able to meet expectations, our expectations at a certain point in time? So that's only my concern, because we've been so focused how we can shift this kind of grading system into something that is more outcome based. But what will happen to our learners who cannot reach? We know that not all learners learn the same way and at the same day. And we are only giving our learners in a time-bound situation of learning. So the challenging question will be, in what way or how, what have we done so far in terms of empowering learners who cannot meet expectations at a given point in time?
Okay, thank you very much. There were, again, some more hands up. Professor Harden.
It's interesting and complicated question, because I think both the use of technology can be an expected learning outcome, but it also can be a tool to help other learning outcomes. For example, in medicine or healthcare, the use of hand ultrasound is a technique that all junior doctors now have to learn. So it is one of the expected learning outcomes, that technology. But it's also been found that that learning outcome, the use of hand technology, hand scanning, can also contribute to other learning outcomes that with it, students can get a better understanding of human anatomy and applying certain procedures using that technology. So it's both a learning outcome and a tool.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Wajid, would you like to enter the debate at this moment?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gavin. I'm coming back to the point which Dr. Sperry makes. It's about a pilot trying to land a plane. And if he just announces that, hey, you know, any passenger out there who knows how to open the landing gear, so I think people will not be very happy at that point. And, you know, so we do need assessments. And Ronald Harden is with us. I mean, if you go to a doctor and then he prescribes you all kinds of assessments that keep you going in circles, and we see that a lot of time people even die because of that. So we need assessments. So, but we need accurate assessments. This is a very key. So for accurate assessments, we need to have the right frameworks. We need to have alignments, the right alignments. So whatever we are testing is actually what we prescribe that the student is going to learn. And then we need to have specific information. Right now, the kind of information that exists in schools and institutions is too generic. And because of being too generic, we lose the specificity and the accuracy. In assessment, we say validity and reliability. So when we start becoming too generic, all of the accreditation models out there, they're so generic. And when we go to schools and visit their quality systems, it's all very, very generic language. And unfortunately, that doesn't help us to find out what competence is acceptable. So we do need that. The second part of technology is that technology, unfortunately, today doesn't track this information for every student. Bill says all students can succeed, but not in the same day, in the same way. But we are not collecting skills information for every student. This is a big problem. So there are ways to do that. There's technology available to do that, and to also classify learning and to evaluate and push it for recognizing where the failures are and to do improvement. So those aspects of technology are also very critical. So numbers are not right every time, but if you do the right methods and the right frameworks and you have the right technology, numbers can make a lot of sense. They can tell you a lot of information. That's my few cents, please.
Thank you very much. And there's somebody else who wants to come back in over here. Dr. Singh.
Thank you. Again, I would try to limit my response to as short as possible, but it's actually a wonderful point that Dr. Wajid brought in. And actually, the reason I raised my hand is because when I was listening to Professor Anil, there were two beautiful points two beautiful contrasts rather that Dr. Wajid brought in and Professor Anil brought in, and I wanted to join them together. When we started this conversation, I started critiquing to a point about EdTech is because it's been about 4 years. I worked as a CEO for 2 EdTech startups in India, in Bangalore, which is the technology hub, before moving back into K-12. So when I realized building an algorithm for outcome-based assessment for a child, for a K-12 child, how do I bring in the experiential factor into my assessment model? So I'm just giving an example. I went through, let's say, all kinds of different assessment models, right from Bloom's to probably temperamental to MI to, I tried sort of doing that mad scientist view, and I had wonderful people working with me. But at the end of the day, what I realized is that if the child is able to, like, I'll give you an example. If I ask you tomorrow, okay, you know what, I want you to go around the house and I want you to run for about 5 kilometers and come back and tell me, and then I want you to solve a sports related question, which is related to your 5 kilometers of running, probably hypothetically, because there's a lockdown, you can't step out. So, or I want you to go and look at the plants that you probably have in the house, and I want you to come up with a science experiment based on the limitations that you have in the house. We came to a point where we started scanning the child's house to look for learning opportunities that are available in their ecosystem, because they could not step out of the house because there was a lockdown. So my logic has always been very simple. If I cannot create experiential hands-on learning using a screen, and if I can't make the child feel that they're actually learning with all the best technology and the best minds available, then there is something still missing in my algorithm. So the reason I just wanted to add is that the 3 points, actually, even I wanted to add the point that Professor Elias talked about, that technology is so beautiful because it's creative. There is no end to it. The point is, you can do, just to give an example, I was working as a head of school of a Cambridge school. My physical education teacher came up to me. He's like, my whole job depends on making the kids run on the track. Now, how do I hold my job? I said, well, it's quite simple, actually. So we came up, we're like, you know what? The kids are stuck at home. For the first time, the millennial parents are stuck at home. They cannot do surrogate parenting anymore. They can't send the kid for horse riding or for the book club or to the swimming pool. They're all stuck in one apartment in, let's say, Mumbai or Bangalore. So let's, use physical education actually as an academic tool, which became actually very famous. The parents were actually looking forward to every evening, not for science or maths or English, but they were looking forward to the physical education teacher simply just sending them a 4-minute video of what exercise the family should do together, and then record themselves back and send it back. And this is the early days of the pandemic. So what I'm trying to say is that you just have to be creative about it. It's just about the 5 C's, guys. I just wanted to end the conversation from my end because I've taken a lot of time, and I do apologize. It's connectedness, the 5 C's that I always believe in: connectedness, conversation, please do communicate, build curiosity, have consideration, which is also compassion and empathy. You have to build a sense of community globally, locally. Think local and build global, please. We can't solve world problems if we can't look at our backyard. And of course, please be sensitive to every single culture. These are the 5 C's that I've literally lived with. And if we generally can use them according to wherever we are, and if we can work together, it sounds very philosophical, I know, but there's a very good window that's open between 2022 now till 2025, where we can work and solve a lot of problems. So I would implore all of you here that we should not just talk about it, we should work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to follow those yellow hands which keep appearing. So Professor Meshbahuddin, what would you like to say and join this conversation?
Yeah, not a lot. I have been listening to all interesting conversations that's going on. What I would like to tell you that technology has become a part of our life, and it is developing day by day to such an extent that we cannot avoid that. But whenever we are using the technology, we must not forget what we are intending to do, what we are aiming for, what we are going to achieve, because students sometimes get so much mechanical with the help of technology that they forget what is the ultimate aim of learning outcome or learning the things that are there. The technology has developed to such an extent that we cannot do away with it. The medical science is totally, dependent on technology. They want to, the PET CT scan, the CT scan, everything. They are now essential part of the knowledge. So we need to understand the whole phenomena, and we need to use it judiciously to achieve our goal. That's what I would like to say. And secondly, we have been talking about assessment. Assessment assessment has got multiple dimensions. We cannot just assess it one way or other. We have to assess the performance or the achievement by doing various different types of assessment. We have to develop the rubrics for achieving the best possible results. This is what I would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know there's another hand up and I'll come to that in a moment. Can I just have a follow-up question to you? When parents come and talk to you, what do you think is the main thing that they are looking for from the educational system that you are suggesting or promoting? Did you get that? Let me try again.
Who's that question for?
That question was for the last speaker, but I'm very happy. Would you like to come in and answer that question?
No, I'd like to comment on other things, so please have someone else take that question.
Okay, let me do that. I'll have someone else take that question and then I'll come back to you. Professor Fong Mak, please go ahead. But the question I was asking was, when parents come to consider putting their child through an OBE system, what's the thing that they are most interested in?
I raised my hand for different questions, but I'll address this one also. I'll address this one. Well, I'm a parent myself. I have 2 kids. So I'll naturally ask the same question to my teacher as well. For the OBE system that we're going to implement, what I'm looking for. Naturally, I'm looking for the future for my child. I want my child to be empowered to learn and to be able to be independent, living a fruitful life and be happy and know exactly what they need to do in lifelong learning. And those are all the skills that I think a child needs to have. And those are things that was a focus in our education for holistic development. That's what I would say to the parents. But I would like to address pick up what was left off. We do need assessment. There are some situations that practical that we have to consider also. Okay, no doubt that we are looking into the OBE implementation, it's expanded opportunity for students. But what happened, Novella also mentioned, what happened that if the students take longer time than the time frame we define in the curriculum to learn? Let's say double amount of time. Right now in US, the average time for a student to get a degree is 5 years for 4-year programs. What happened if the student takes 6 years to learn the subject matter in order to be mastering or to the point that it can self-sufficient? Then who in the equation to support the financial needed for the student to learn? How do we do it those? We're not looking at one individual. Let's say you look at university that have 30,000 students. So OBE by design, it pretty much individualized special educations by design. We consider the factor of expected learning. Now, if you have 35,000 students, how are we going to ensure the quality of teaching consistently all the way across? How? Now, how do we also ensure to maintain the student learning all the way through when some of them are slower than others? How? So I don't have an answer to this question at all. I'm just trying it out. I'm hoping that somebody can pick it up. And, I just don't know. I wish to have the solution for this. I end here.
Thanks very much, and for coming around to answer the question I was putting to you. I'll now pick up I know that William Spady was going to say something, so let's move over to you. Let me see, yes. Yes, Dr. Spady.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to pick up on something that I think Mr. Bhatnagar raised with us very early. It was absolutely fundamental. Outcome-based education emerged out of a deep sense of purpose. Okay, it is purpose that fundamentally defines outcomes. Okay, why are we here as an education system? What are we trying to do? And are we being consistent with that purpose? when Dr. Charles Schwann and I developed a future-focused framework that we called strategic design way back in 1987. Okay, we were going into communities and we were building consensus, et cetera, about what is the best evidence we have about the future, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure we could do that today in the United States. And I'm not sure we could do that today in a lot of other countries, because culturally and paradigmatically, we have become so divided that consensus building around something is enormously difficult. Maybe you colleagues have a different experience with that, but I've shared that idea with him. I'm not sure we could do our work today the way the work was inspiring people and changing and creating cohesion around purpose, and we were able to build toward that purpose. I'm not sure we could do that today. And that may come back to Dr. Singh's point about, is the future of outcome-based education, authentic outcome-based education, does it lie in private schools and private attempts rather than in giant public systems? I don't know. I devoted my career to public and pretty much gave up over here in the US around that, because the system got so captured in accountability systems and test scores and all of this narrow stuff, that the public systems were what Des said we want to avoid. It was being run by the politicians, okay? And the politicians thought that they knew what education should be, etc. So I'm just putting this out there for further discussion among you. These are deep issues, and I believe in this concept, and we can take it in incredibly creative directions, or we can, watch it be captured by ideological and political interests that basically will undermine and destroy it. And I don't want to see that. I'm so enheartened by the summit and those of you, so all of you who have participated in this. It's wonderful for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I, yes, I'll come to you, Dr. Jenna Carpenter. Are you hearing me?
Yes,
You are hearing. Just picking up on what Dr. Spady said, there's 2 points really. One is, are these ideas best left to private schools outside the public arena? I hope I'm not misquoting him. And do you also believe that consensus building, which is so critical to your project here, has become enormously difficult, perhaps because of social media, but that's a question mark in my mind. What would you like to say to that?
Well, so I actually have experience. My daughter went to a public high school in the US. I intentionally put her there because they had a brand new program that was very much hands-on project-based, so outcome-based learning like we're talking. So, they had a course that integrated like their English course, their history course, integrated that content around projects, the same for math and science. They built a catapult, for example, when they were studying trigonometry. They had to learn how to work together. They created web pages and books. I mean, they did, to be honest, an enormous amount of work, much more work than you would do in a standard curriculum. And yet most of it happened at school. So they didn't have more homework than normal, but they were doing a lot more work. Now, I put her there on purpose because, again, I knew that was a much better way to learn than the standard curriculum. I will admit that there were some parents who were concerned. As the year went along, they were a bit concerned. I knew they would be all right. And sure enough, at the end of the freshman year, the first year of high school, when they took those standardized state exams, they blew the doors off them. They scored much better than all of the other students at that high school who were doing a standard curriculum. And so with that, all of the concern evaporated, right? you quit hearing parents concerned about this. I knew that was going to happen, and sure enough, it did. And so, it was a much, much better. I'm afraid that program does not exist any longer. She's not been out of high school that long. It was time intensive, and you have to have champions there who are willing to do that. Your administration has to be willing to say, no, we're going to teach this way. So you can do it. You can do it in a public school environment. You could do it in a private school environment. I'm at a private university, but much of what I'm doing at my university, we did at the previous university, which was a public institution. So what you really have to have are faculty and teachers and administrators who buy in, who understand what you're doing. And it's important to help parents and students understand why you're doing what you're doing. When we have people come visit our program, we talk about the different way that we teach. But, once you explain it to people, they're excited to come on board, right? Because it makes sense. It's not hard to realize that this is a much better way to learn than a standard rote type environment, right? So students are excited. They get to learn things. They get to put their hands on things. And so it can work, and it can work much better. Certainly in today's politically charged environment, could be challenging, but I think that with right messaging and good evidence behind this, you can do a good job.
Thank you very much. It's a question I perhaps put to Elias Samper, is this question about, are we living not just in Europe and in the United States, but but also, I think, in India, perhaps in Bangladesh or the Philippines, I don't know, but are we living in such divided societies that it's actually harder to introduce these programs than perhaps in previous times?
Well, thank you very much for that. I do believe that, yes, I think we are living at a time when it's so much divided, and it's really creating a lot of stress. I mean, just to communicate the message of outcome-based education, for example, experimenting on a number of models, we had to go through a lot of convincing people, okay? Trying to convince, because you have always, people would attack something over that. For example, we have eliminated the practice of ranking students. And it was just very difficult for many people to understand. If you remove ranking students, what is happening in school? We said, well, we are going to reward and recognize student development, but it's not going to be based on ranking them. It is going to be based on pure recognizing their accomplishments and how they're evolving. So we can get the top performing students, like 20, the whole class of 20 people, they're all top performing students. Why? Because we are not interested in ranking them. We are interested in growing them, in developing them. So that paradigm, when it was introduced, is kind of like people would be very much concerned about it. But what we have seen over time, I want to link this back to the first question that you asked, what feedback we're getting from parents. The parents are very impressed with the idea that their children don't have to be ranked, okay? But they are recognized for their performance. The parents are happy to see their children collaborating with one another rather than competing with one another. And so we create an environment where students are excited to grow as human beings, but not to be motivated by wanting to be on top of one another. And I think this, I would say that some of the things that we are doing that can help out to overcome the divided context in which we are living, if people can see evidence that inspire them for the better future for their children and for shared community, I think they are much more interested to embrace everything we are doing in outcome-based education. I don't think that our OBE in its own structure, it doesn't have much divisive kind of structure. It's a much more open, embracing, and in itself, in that sense, it inspires more unity than dividing people. So I think those are the points I wanted to share.
And just before I go for the next question, but you said twice about not being interested in ranking students.
Yeah.
And does that come up with some pushback from parents who fear that if their children are not ranked, they'll lose out in some way?
Well, it did come up in the very beginning, but later on people began to understand it. Because when you set very high expectations, and our assessment structures were built on a 3-point scale, right, which are purely descriptions of what's happening to the students. So we are using descriptors, not numbers. So what you are saying here is for students to be recognized as really growing very well, we have to take a look in a similar way that companies will do when they say KPIs, key performance indicators. So what is it in here that we can tell parents, your child is progressing because of this kind of evidence? Parents now have become very much involved. There are many times when we have asked parents to provide their own assessment of their children in terms of describing what they are seeing in their children. Can they read better than they did before? Can they work better? I mean, are they functionally effective than they were at the beginning? Often we have seen that their parent assessment coincide, almost lines up with what the teacher experience is with those children. So in that sense, authenticity has really removed so much of subjectivity that is often associated with grades, where students will feel like the teacher is very strict with me or is favoring someone else. They have tended to see that it's a community, a shared assessment. We are trying to describe and share those descriptions with students, with parents, with the entire public. So everybody can look at them and say, yes, the child is here. It has become very much accepted and they are celebrating it. In the beginning, actually, one aspect I want to add here, Gavin and the team, is that they were thinking, if we don't rank students, maybe mediocrity will creep in. So we did not remove the idea of awarding students, because you need to award, you need to recognize progress and call it as progress. So we created that, but it is based really on manifestations that are done. So students don't have to compete to receive an award, but they have to really demonstrate to the best of their ability, and then we recognize it. So we are not removing recognition, which actually inspires students to grow more, rather than discourage them to progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the time, and we've got about, I think, kind of 7-8 minutes to bring this all together. So I know that there are various hands up, but from experience, I know the importance of staying within time. What I think I will do is just go around with everybody again, like we did at the beginning, and just say what they've taken away from this. And I think that should fill up the 7 minutes, unless there's somebody burning. But if you've got something burning to say, I think hopefully you can say it in the last few minutes that we've got. So let's start off again with Dr. Spady about what you've taken out from this conversation.
I've taken out a wealth of information and experience that all of you provide, and I absolutely would love to have this dialogue continue and partnerships and relationships fostered in every case. Thank you. Thank you.
So the next person who spoke at the very beginning was Professor Ronald Harden. I'm looking for your picture up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, sorry, you were there. I was looking at the strip at the very top. Yes, well, what have you taken away from this conversation?
Yeah, the whole fascinating sequence of events. Perhaps the one thing that I just wonder, and it raised a provocative question also, I like this idea that was raised about the difficulty of getting a consensus on the outcomes. This seems to be a burning issue, and I think it relates to an issue that we've not really addressed, and that's the question of the level of granularity of the learning outcomes. Because we found in medicine, for example, the 5 Scottish schools were able to get together and agree the 12 frameworks, 12 domains for the outcomes. There was universal agreement, and the chief medical officer at one stage said, it's the only first thing that the Scottish deans have ever agreed on is these frameworks. But that still left each individual school to specify more detail. They weren't all the same. There needed to be flexibility. And within each framework, each of these 12 domains, in each of these domains, they could specify slightly different outcomes for their medical school. So I think it is the problem of getting consensus relates to this issue of the granularity of the learning outcomes we're expecting to be specified, and who has the authority at the different levels.
Thanks very much. Let's now go to, keeping in line as far as I can of how we began this discussion, let's now go to Professor Aniel Zaras-Rabuda.
Yeah, in fact, it is wonderful. We talked about various issues. Professor Spady was saying that building consensus is very difficult. but 13 people, different viewpoints, we all converged. That means the spirit of oneness, spirit of convergence does exist in the humanity. It's only a simple way of looking at it that we should ask a question: do you want to be happy? Everyone will say, yes, I would like to be happy. Do you want the other person also to be happy? Yes, he also should be happy. Then we should maybe differ in our opinions, but also have consensus and move ahead. And that's the spirit which I learned today here.
Thank you very much. Just quickly bringing this to a conclusion, we turn now to Professor Mesbaruddin of the Bangladesh Council. What was your experience of today? Maybe that one has moved away from us. Let's now go to Jenna Carpenter, just to sum up briefly.
Yeah, so really impressed with the variety of efforts going out on outcomes-based education around the world. So it's been exciting to hear about and learn about that. But I guess on the flip side of that, we are really the exceptions for most places. And so, you know, the question I'm left with is, how do we take this? It works well, we know that. How do we take this model and get it dispersed so that more people are using outcomes-based education? Of course, that's the whole purpose of the summit.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now, Professor Mag Fong, your final thoughts?
I'm very glad to be part of this team and to be honored to be here to really enjoy the discussions and different ideas. I think we're only at the beginning stage of looking into not only the principle, but the possible implementation of OBE. And there are different models that have root block ahead of time, but I think we can get there one step at a time. That's what I'm getting out from these discussions.
Okay, thank you. And now some final thoughts from Dr. Wajid Hussain.
Thank you, Gavin. I think technology would be very crucial to implement outcome-based education. And to get consensus, we have to get the right kind of frameworks and the right kind of standards, across different sectors. Once we have that and properly developed, and with the right kind of technology and communication, we can try to achieve better consensus. Another thing that we could possibly think about is when we were small in India, we used to study moral science, and it was a part of our curriculum. However, now it's out of curriculum, and that teaches a lot of tolerance, that teaches a lot of understanding, and I think we should come back to those subjects as well, and not just technical content. So with that said, I'd like to close on my
all right. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Professor Elias Samper. Your final thoughts.
Well, I have two things that I have taken out. And number one is I am inspired by the growing synergy. I think we need so much of synergy. Realizing that somewhere around the globe, people are working to build up a new society that is based on outcome-based education learning. The second aspect is the idea that we are now talking about educating humans, not teaching subjects. Okay, and I think those are things that I'm taking up from here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And so a final thought from Des Collier. Are you there, Des Collier?
Des isn't here right now.
Okay, I don't, can you hear me? Not to worry, I'm going to move on to Dr. Labella Divina Grazia.
Well, I find our panel discussion to be very empowering. Summit, the IN4OBE Summit 2022 is very empowering. As I was reflecting, I see that our collective sense of maturity, beliefs, our values, our dispositions, our knowledge of our primary role and responsibility among others, among ourselves and the life, such as responsible governance, responsible business, responsible politics, responsible journalism, responsible education, responsible use of technology and their implications, and above all, to the author of our existence, the quality of our maturity and the rest of people's qualities depend so much on how we view authorship of our existence and life. We have a choice, but what choice would that be? Education, therefore, has to make a choice and do something about it. For me, I really love transformational OBE, which acknowledges, empowers, and nurtures our giftedness, harmonizes our unique individuality, and transcends our perspective of reality. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And two final voices. One, Dr. Karen Singh.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm just gonna, first of all, I just wanted to tell all the panelists here that it's been an amazing session, and we always in education, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So Dr. William Spady, I wanted to say this to you, that all of your work, your life's work, it's always eternal. So that we all of us educationists, whether we are from any country, we always stand on the shoulders of giants, and the giants are the people who spend their whole lives developing something. So people like Professor Anil, like Professor William Spady, people like Professor Harden, we stand on your shoulders. This is always going to be the case. The beauty of education. Second, quickly wanted to tell you, it's absolutely imperative that parents are also inspired to be co-teachers. The world is reaching there. Let's not have the leaders that you're seeing in the world right now. I'm not going to quote certain leaders that are leading such wonderful endeavors in the world right now as we speak. But if these are the kind of leaders, remember, they had teachers one day. They were students one day. So probably something has gone wrong in their education system, so that the kind of leaders that are leading the world is a perfect example for you to look at the future. Let's not repeat that mistake. But having said that, we do stand on the shoulder of giants. Thank you so much, all of you, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our last panelist is Vikasrai Bhatnagar. Your final thought, and then we'll bring this session to a close.
What has excited me most is the convergence towards the human centricity. Immanuel Kant had mentioned that human beings should never be treated as a means towards an end, but always as an end, because they possess the property of consciousness, which is so precious. The rational economic man conceptualization of human being is a truncated model, which doesn't work. The systemic economic framework of human being, which has all the faculties and dynamic interaction, is what is required. The last point that I would like to make is that Swami Vivekananda had mentioned that one can by heart the whole of library, but then it is more important to have few ideas internalized which can change the world as compared to by hearting the whole of library. So our cognition has to be married with our affection, with the feeling. We act when we feel for a cause, right? And we need to have more of these discussions around feeling in the education, and that has to be guided by ethics. What is the right thing to do? I think Milton Friedman had also mentioned that the business is to make profit. The social purpose of business is to make profit as long as it is ethical and without deception and fraud, right? So we miss out on the last part. So ethics is very, very important. What is the right thing to do with feeling and married with the cognition? It has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. I'm so enlightened by the quality of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Time doesn't wait for anyone, as they say, and I think we've probably gone a little bit beyond our time, but thank you for making my life possible during the last couple of hours. So thank you very much.
Gavin, you've done a marvelous job.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. It was a pleasure to meet you here. Thank you.
Gavin, there are 3 questions. Do you want to take one question from the audience, because we haven't?